slides showing up? Somebody give me a
Yeah.
thumbs up. Yep, okay, good. All right, so commercialization and exit is our last topic here. So I want to talk just really quickly about the commercialization process. And again, this is super quick overview of a very, very long process here. But ultimately, what we want to do when we're talking about university and commercialization of a university technology is go from invention over here, invention disclosure, this is where we are now, to this being commercialized by a corporate. Okay, we are not talking about commercializing technologies with your startup, most likely. Okay, I'll say most likely there are some cases where you may have a company that's going to commercialize your technology, but in most cases, when you're talking about university technologies, our goal is to find a corporate who has manufacturing and global sales, global logistics, huge amounts of capital, lots of experience and resources, salespeople already in the channels that understand the marketplaces. They're the ones that are going to be the end commercialization entities for these technologies. So the simplest case scenario and the best case scenario from the case of all of us is if there's a corporate out there at the time of disclosure that says, yes, we'll give you a check. Where do we send the check? We love this technology. We want this technology right now. How many zeros do you want me to put on the check? Okay. If that's the kind of call we get, we're all elated. And there are some cases where that does happen. So I don't want to take that off the table. That is a viable commercialization opportunity, and it does happen every day in our universities. So that's one possibility. The next possibility is they say, you know what, we're really interested in this, but where we are right now, we can't take this technology on. We need you to answer some additional questions for us, and we may be interested. And in that case, we might do some de-risking work within the university. So that could be something like Kinetic, where you use programs like this. It may be additional federal funding. There may be a number of different options to get this to happen. But you take your technology and they have maybe identified the risks. So this is the really nice thing about talking to the corporate is they tell you if you answer question 1, 2, and 3, we're interested. Well, you've now answered everything you need to know about the previous presentation. We know what are the things that need to be done. Those become highest priority tasks. So that's another possibility is we do the de-risking within the university. We answer those questions and they say, yep, with those answers, we've confirmed we're really interested. We want to go forward. In some cases, they may come back and say, yeah, we're still not interested, or we can't get it there. There's some other issues that we need to work through. And so before we go from de-risking within the university, we need to go through a startup, and we do additional de-risking within a startup. In that case, you may be able to apply some tools such as SBIR funding. You may be able to do some investor funding. You may be able to get into strategic partnerships, other things like that with the corporate. So there's things that you can do, and we're going to get into this a little bit more in a second, but there's some things that you can do under a startup that you can't really do within the university. But this may be a process that you need to go through. So we're going to work with you as the office, and the tech manager office in your university is going to work with you to identify what is this best path forward. And then we want to make sure we're using the Kinetic funds in the best possible way that enables that next step, right? And the best case scenario, the most obvious case scenario here is we use Kinetic funding. If we know we're going to have to go through a startup, use Kinetic funding to put ourselves in a position to be really competitive for SBIR. If we know we're going to have to do a startup, we need to be able to fund that. And we'd love to be able to leverage this Kinetic funding to be really well positioned to get a nice SBIR grant to do some initial work. So the key to all this is, and underlying the previous slide, is this idea that a startup is a temporary organization, and it's not the long-term solution. We are not trying to go and create the next Apple or the next Merck or the next Abbott or the next, fill in the blank big company in your industry. That's not our goal, is for you as a faculty member to run a multinational Fortune 500 company. Our goal is for you to get to use this startup in the event that a startup is needed to move this technology forward to the point that it becomes of interest to the big companies. So Steve Blank is the one who created this definition, and Steve Blank is also the one that is the kind of forefather, the patriarch of the lean startup movement. You may have heard that name. A lot of the stuff that Fausto talked about is drawn from Steve Blank's work. So he's a professor at Stanford. So it's a temporary organization, and the goal of a startup is to search. Okay, we're searching for a business model that leverages technology to solve problems in the market, right? That's our goal. When we get to the point of we found this repeatable, scalable business model, leveraging this technology, solving problems in the market, that's when a corporate's going to get interested. The startup's going to exit, and they're just going to buy your company along with all the IP. So that's our goal. So a couple of high-level questions here. You might need a startup if, and again, our goal here is not always to drive you to a startup, but there are times when a startup is needed. So here's some things where you can think about. This is when the time is right to develop a startup. So the scope of work is not aligned with the university's mission. So the universities are doing basic science research, and when we move from research to more commercialization tasks, manufacturing and other things like that, some regulated FDA level things. There's some things where we may cross a line here and say, this is no longer something that's appropriate to be done within the university. We need to spin this out into a startup to continue the de-risking work. Risks and responsibilities beyond the university's role. So one great example here is the FDA stuff that Ted talked about. When you start talking about filing 510Ks and NDAs and or INDs and other things like that, those are things that should be done, and then there's roles of a company that it's not really appropriate for the university to be doing some of that work. So your hand may get pushed into forming a startup at that point. Another is access to capital. The Kinetic is a great program that provides a couple $100,000 if you go through all the phases to help you de-risk your technologies. But certainly, if we're going to move into something where we need to get $1 million, multiple millions of dollars, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in the case of a drug, you're going to need to do that in the form of a startup. Acquiring talent, space, and logistics, those are all things that likely will need to be done outside the university. So it's very difficult for most of us to hire people within the university to do things, to do certain types of things. So all of those types of things may really push that. And then finally, if you're talking to a corporate and we've de-risked it through Kinetic and other things, as much as we can do within the university, maybe we get out into a startup, we've done some SBIR. What would be really ideal if you're talking to that corporate all the way along is to be able to get into a strategic partner relationship, joint development agreement with that strategic or with that corporate. And those are things that might really necessitate being in a startup mode. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Raja, and then at the end, I guess we'll answer your questions together. So Raja, it's all yours.
Are you guys seeing my screen and can you hear me? Okay. So today I'm going to continue from Eric's conversation. So we're going to talk a little bit about risk tolerance. I know that Eric mentioned a little bit about this in his killer experiments topic. I'm hopefully going to build and expand on this a little bit and maybe give a different perspective. Then we're going to talk about when you approach potential industry partners, what types of questions they might ask you, and what you need to be kind of ready for in that conversation as that progresses. And then I'm going to talk to you about venture building firms. We know about startups, we know about venture capital and investors. Now I'm going to talk to you about this other category, this hybrid, a venture building firm. So here's the timeline. It's a general timeline. This is applicable for a therapeutic, to bring a therapeutic drug to the market. You go through the different phases here. You got preclinical, IND, phase 1 clinical trial, phase 2, phase 3, and then on to FDA approval. And just talking about the risk, and again, building on what Eric has said in a previous presentation, you're going to start out all the way in the beginning at high risk over there on the left. That's going to be your kind of early stage, proof of concept stage. And then, as you go along, you're going to be developing your product or technology, and you're going to be mitigating more risk as you go towards the right. So all the way on the right, you've got the lowest amount of risk, could be at the latest stage. And, of course, if it's FDA approved, it's the least amount of risk, right? And then you see that that correlates with the value, right? So you got the least amount of value of the technology on the left, and you got the greatest amount of value after you've decreased the risk all the way on the right. And that's also going to correlate when you have a startup, when you're at a higher risk technology, the investors are going to ask for more equity in the startup. And then as you go mitigating more and more risk, that's going to change. So then you see time, this is increasing time going to the right. And as I said, the amount of investment, you need a greater investment over to the left where you need to do more work. So I'm going to give you a little example. You're going to need partners to get your technology all the way across. You're going to need partners strategically to give you funding, for example, to get through phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials all the way through the commercial. And your partners are going to be they could be different depending on the type of therapeutic area. Let's say you're looking at whether it's Alzheimer's, cancer. They're going to all have different priorities and different tolerance to risk in these different areas based on what their priorities are. So let's take an example. Let's say you're working on an Alzheimer's technology, and you go out and talk to different people, different potential partners and different companies. And then you could find out that, let's say, Eli Lilly and ASI from Japan, they have a high priority in Alzheimer's, and maybe they are willing to consider partnering with you or even acquiring you, let's say, when you're getting closer to IND, when you've done a lot of preclinical testing in animal models already, and maybe they're okay with some amount of risk because that's a higher priority for them in their portfolio. On the other hand, you might go and talk to companies like Merck or Biogen, and perhaps they would come back and say, no, you got to have much more data. You got to have the IND file. You got to actually get into phase 1 clinical trials, and then come and talk to us, and we might be interested. So the idea here is that each company is going to be different, and you need to have these informational discussions with the company as you go through the process, and see what their interests are, and see what their risk tolerance is, see what studies they want done. And you need to know to talk to the right people as well. Normally, the people that would understand this, and in terms of what the priorities are and what risks they're willing to take, are people in groups like search and evaluation, or licensing, or technology scouting. So those are the types of folks that would be most keenly aware of what these companies are willing to do. So now, the questions. So we got, what type of questions an industry partner might ask or potential acquirers. So of course, they're going to ask you, what type of data do you have? Do you have in vivo data, or if you have in vivo data, how much data? Do you have it in multiple, let's say, animal models? And do you have efficacy? Do you have safety data, toxicology data? So those are some of the questions. Then, of course, how far have you gotten along in mitigating this risk? Then they could ask you, do you have any grants or funding to further progress this technology? Do you have any patents? Are they published? Are they issued yet? And do you have any other research article publications that you could share with them? Now, here's another important one that's been mentioned throughout all the presentations as well. What data can you actually share? And this is something, again, you have to talk to it's a case-by-case basis. You need to talk to your technology commercialization office, see whether an NDA is required. The general idea is that, once you file the patent application, you need to be aware of the contents that are in that application. And you can publish, whatever you've already put in your application through an article or through a presentation. You could also carefully, at a high level, discuss this material with potential partners. Our suggestion is that when it gets to some more detailed scientific discussion, to be on the safe side and to give more kind of freedom to discuss, is that you do take the step to go under the NDA, to get that non-disclosure agreement in place so that you cover all your bases and you're protected, just in case you went beyond the borders of your patent application. So as I mentioned, every case is slightly different, so please check with the office. Then you'd want to know, of course, how your technology is differentiated with others, and with others that are in development or currently on the market. And so we're talking about venture building firms. So these are firms that could have varying degrees of monetary support. So they've got a kind of a VC arm or flavor to it. So they might invest some money. But what they do is they help you build the company. So let's say you're not maybe keen on doing a startup yourself, but want to be intimately involved with the startup from a scientific advisory perspective, or kind of not so much the day-to-day operations, but you want to be involved. So these companies would allow you to do that at various levels. So perhaps you would license this technology to these companies. They would incorporate and form a startup. If needed, maybe they have access to funding. They can even provide funding or help you apply for IRSTTR grants. In return, you would be providing the scientific support and technology expertise and guidance on how they might advance the technology. So you've got a lot of different companies here. There's a company called Fanon down in Houston, SynRx in Cincinnati, Orange Grove Bio, I think they're based out of New York. So these are all different types of companies, and they all have different focuses and in terms of therapeutic area, in terms of technologies. So this is something that's been on the rise. You'll see a lot of these type of firms, and some of them also have the scientific expertise to manage these operations from day to day. So I think it's an interesting avenue to continue to mitigate your risk and advance your technologies, while at the same time not exactly having to be a CEO of a startup and running the day-to-day operations, because these companies will do it for you. I think that's what I had. So any questions now for me and Eric?
Thank you for your presentation. Do we have any questions? Anybody?